going through all those things that I did, I never realized how close I was to life being over. You don't know how good you can feel until you start feeling good. When I realized what veganism was really about, I realized that my whole mission in trying to be more ethical and more compassionate to the environment and like animals, I was really lacking that for myself. The best way to find out what you like, but also what you don't like is just dipping your toes in.
Can you bring us back to when Veggiekins was born?
And it's maybe part of the reason why I feel like I've been able to do this so long. It's been so long.
Hi friends, welcome back to Voice Hugs. In today's episode, we are blessed with the presence of Remy Morimoto Park, also known as Veggiekins, who is an incredible vegan recipe developer, food photographer, her Cosmo and Wanda aesthetics is immaculate, cookbook author, founder of an elevated matcha brand called Frauth, and an all-around amazing human being. Remy's story is truly an inspiring one. Having grappled with addiction and disordered eating from a very young age, she completely 180'd her lifestyle when she entered college through being honest with herself, becoming sober, and discovering veganism, which ultimately kickstarted her almost decade-long journey of healing her relationship with food, family, and most importantly, herself. We hope you enjoy this beautiful and raw conversation as much as we did. As always, you can watch this episode with video on Spotify and YouTube. Quick note on audio quality before jumping into the episode. Our mic battery dies halfway into recording, so there will be a noticeable difference in sound. Thank you for bearing with us as we continually learn and improve. Now on to the episode. Welcome to Voice Hugs, Remy.
Hello, thank you for having me.
We're just gonna go straight into it because I have so many questions. Viv and I both just finished reading your cookbook, Sesame Soy Spice.
It's so good.
It is like a love letter to yourself, to your family, to your culture, to food. It is so beautiful. We'll get into that. For our audience, I'd love to paint a picture of where you were starting from like 7 up until where you are today, because you've been very open, brave, and courageous about many things in your life. Of course, you're a content creator. You're also a recipe developer, a cookbook author, all these amazing things. But you're also very open about your sobriety journey and your relationship with food and how it changed from something that was honestly quite tumultuous to obviously now a much, much healthier lifestyle. Would just love to hear your story from you.
So my family is from New Jersey and New York area. And when we were 7, we made our first move to Asia. And even though we are Asian, my family's Korean, Japanese, and Taiwanese, I really didn't feel that connected to any of those cultures because we grew up in a very American household, I would say. And when we made our first move, it was like culture shock. And I think as a result of that, I developed a couple things, an eating disorder, OCD I realized I had at that time. And I think it was just a lack of feeling like I had any control over my life at that time because it was the first time I'd ever been overseas and we were living in a new country all of a sudden. Similar to, I guess, a military family, we moved around quite a bit throughout Asia, and the experience of living in, I guess, an international country and then also going to an American or international school was just so different from anything that I'd ever experienced before. I was exposed to a lot of partying at a very young age. So the second international school that I went to in Shanghai, I already started doing drugs and drinking alcohol by age 13 or so. It's kind of crazy to say now, but it was almost normal there. Like that was just kind of what we did. Like there wasn't too much to do. Access to everything was so easy. It was almost like what we would do instead of going to like the movies or the malls, like you could do in the US. So that was my life for quite a long time. And then I came back to the US for college. And that's kind of when I think my life started to change quite a bit. It was the first time I really had to confront a lot of issues that I had with an eating disorder because I was cooking everything for myself for the first time. And also, you know, dealing with the substance abuse stuff because everybody who I met in college was just starting to experiment with those things. And I was like well into my journey. It was interesting getting sober at a time where everyone was just kind of starting to explore substances and alcohol. So my college experience was very transformative, I would say. And everything kind of started then. Same with the veganism and all of that.
Even while you were going through, I guess, like your darker times of partying, drinking, even while you were in high school, you were still getting good grades. You
Yeah.
still got into your dream college. How were you able to balance that and still do all the things that you've been able to do?
I think that the work ethic was really ingrained in me, and maybe it's something about being Asian, but I feel like grades and certain achievements like getting into a good college or getting a job are really just like pounded into you. And my parents are not even that strict about it, but I feel like I kind of put that pressure on myself. It felt like if I could maintain those things like grades and show up to like events that I needed to go to, it almost felt like I didn't have a problem. Like I was like, there's no way this is actually a problem because I'm so functional. Now, obviously, I know that truly like a definition of functional alcoholic or a functional addict. But at the time, I think also being younger, it was a little bit easier because I had more energy at the time. But really, I just felt like at the end of the day, nothing mattered except getting good grades, because then I knew at least on paper, nothing was wrong. And my parents actually didn't know that any of that was going on at the time. So for me, it felt like this pressure to uphold this image of everything being fine and normal because A, I didn't want to worry them, and B, I was very much in denial that I had a problem until I went to college, basically. So I'm really, really glad that I was able to do that, because I think had I not gotten into the college that I wanted to go to, I don't know if I would have had the awakening that I did, that I had a problem and like wanted to change it.
Was there a defining moment that came about? Because you said your healing journey started in college when you were starting to cook for yourself. Was there something that made you realize like, oh, I want to introduce change into my life, especially at a time when you're in an environment now where everyone is starting to drink, everyone is starting to explore that life, and you've kind of lived it already?
I think that was the biggest thing for me, was that I had my first roommate and she had grown up in the US her whole life. Talking to her about experiences and comparing stories from high school, I could really see that I had a problem, because I would say, oh, you know, like when you go out and you black out or you know, something like that. And she'd be like, no, I don't actually know what you mean. And I was like, oh, okay. I think I was also very lucky that in the US you need a fake ID, and I never needed one in Asia. So I think that was already a barrier for me to begin with. Also, it was so much harder to get my hands on certain drugs that I would normally. And so I think all of that kind of made me realize like, oh, this life that I was living, it's actually not normal at all. And speaking to other people gave me that perspective. Mostly it was that I started to get really physically tired, because at the same time I was dealing with an eating disorder and was definitely underweight. And it was almost like I felt like my body could no longer keep up anymore. It was so much easier to get by on like less food when I was younger. But like the more I started to get older, it was really, really difficult to basically like continue to live that life and then also try to focus on like this new experience being in college and like wanting to get a job. So I guess the shift in environment was what inspired me the most. And then realizing that this is a fresh start where I don't know any of the people that I used to know. My friends are not all addicts like myself, and I can actually like start fresh without that pressure. So I think for me, it was just college.
For those who've watched my videos online, or, you know, I've talked about this on our podcast too, it's something that I've similarly gone through in terms of like the escaping, the numbing, the running away from all the things, right? At an earlier age. In your book, you wrote about how you were so like hyper aware of body image and your weight at such an early age. I can't imagine how big of an impact like it must have made for you to like continue to like make the decisions that you've made. And like when we're 7, like our brains are not fully functional, right?
Yeah.
And I think for me, like I became aware of my body and the way that I looked also through magazines, like the teen magazines, maybe a little later, like maybe in high school. So the fact that you're exposed to it at such an early age, I feel for you. And
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you.
Aw, thank
And
you.
it's just crazy. Like even, you know, like the things that our parents would tell us and how that would affect us. And I don't know where I'm going.
Well, I think the messaging is everywhere, especially in an Asian household, because it's not meant to be. I think about it now as it's not something that's meant to carry negative weight, but like body image and like words and language we use around it are inherently neutral. Like there's no such thing as a good or bad body. Like even the word fat is not necessarily a good or bad thing. It's, you know, fat is fat. But for some reason, I feel like it's very easy to almost like relate the feeling of what you look like to your self-worth, especially in Asian culture. And I think for me, when I was moving there from the US, I felt like I wanted to be small, not necessarily physically, but I just didn't want to stand out. You know, I was like very confused and in this transitional period of my life. So I almost feel like that translated into me kind of being able to control something in my life and then wanting to feel smaller and kind of like like don't notice me. I just want to be small. So I think it's like a matter of also wanting to learn to take up space. 'Cause that's still something that I struggle with today. But a lot of that I think has to do with the way that we're raised in an Asian household too. It's ingrained in us to not take up space and just be very caring and thoughtful of others and maybe not so much ourselves.
Before we continue with the episode, we want to drop in and share that our Voice Hug shop is now live. Our first launch, called the For All Seasons collection, includes 5 super cute greeting cards that can be sent to your besties throughout any season of their lives. I love writing cards as much as I love receiving them. There's something so meaningful about taking time out of our busy lives to reflect, put our thoughts onto paper, especially when it comes to expressing how much someone means to you and how grateful or proud you are of them. We designed the For All Seasons collection with that sentiment in mind. These cards are a great way to remind your loved ones that you are always in their corner, and we also hope they serve as a reminder to you of how amazing you are and that we're always rooting for you. With your help, let's spread more hugs around the world, one handwritten card at a time. You can find the collection on www.voicehugspodcast.com. Now back to the episode.
I think control is a huge thing when it comes to eating disorders, addiction, all these things, similarly to everything that, I've gone through and have shared already, or I've shared before. Like, what were the steps you took to address or to acknowledge it? And then how did you start peeling away the layers to live like a lighter,
Healthier,
more healed life.
life.
I kind of addressed everything at once. It felt like a huge lifestyle shift for me. And I think it worked hand in hand that way with the drugs and the alcohol and working on my relationship with food. So one thing I noticed was that as soon as I started getting physically healthier, I felt the impact more of like drugs and alcohol, because finally my body was in a state where I actually felt good. And so I could pinpoint when I felt bad, which was definitely every time I would use or drink. But I think that the biggest thing for me was actually finding veganism, because it gave me a reason to be interested in food all of a sudden. Before I was very afraid of food. Like, I would dread lunchtime at school and like think about ways that I would hide my food and try to like go another day eating minimal food. And it was just so much planning and control, basically, and this like obsession with food in a negative way. Finally, when I was in college and became interested in veganism, I realized that if I wanted to eat vegan food, at that time, it was definitely not as normal. Like, I realized I had to cook for myself. And I think that's what was almost like the healing process for me, because suddenly I had to work with food in the kitchen, be interested, look up recipes. It was almost like a form of exposure therapy for me. But at the same time, I was working with someone at my school's like psychiatry office and working with a dietitian as well, and a nutritionist, just to make sure that I was actually healing. So I think one is identifying the problem. I think that's always really difficult to do, but an easy way that I was able to realize now that I had a problem was that no matter how healthy I was being or eating, if my relationship with food wasn't healthy, then the whole thing just isn't healthy. So I would feel so stressed when I didn't have full control over the food that I was eating. So like going home to my grandparents' place and being like, oh, I feel like this food isn't healthy or low calorie or, what I want to eat that day. That's kind of where I realized that there was this disconnect. And not only was I unhealthy, but I also was kind of damaging my relationship with my family, because I think food is so important, especially in an Asian household. And around the same time, I decided, oh, well, I might as well try and get sober as well. So I would go to meetings at this church nearby my school every now and then. I think my biggest motivation in all of it was that I really didn't want to go to like an inpatient rehab and miss school, because I was like, I finally made it to college. I don't want to have to like redo this or even like be held back a semester. So that was my biggest motivation, to like get through it and do it all while I was still in school. And I think it really helped me, because I was a very boring college student. It was like going to meetings, working with a dietitian, cooking, and then going to classes and like doing as much as I could. Like, I was taking so many credits each semester just to get out of there. So not the most traditional college experience, but I think going back to veganism,
a very healthy one.
Yeah, eventually. I think that the vegan portion though really helped me, because when I realized what veganism was really about, I realized that my whole mission in trying to be more ethical and more compassionate to the environment and like animals, I was really lacking that for myself. And I think that's when I made the connection. I was like, oh, this is more than just about me. Like, I'm not being vegan for a dietary reason or like, to like be thinner or anything. It's really to be better and to be more intentional. So that was like the biggest click for me, I think.
Something that you pointed out earlier on is that
you can be totally functioning and totally not okay on the inside. And knowing that that was what you were going through at the time, being able to find that shift at a time where everyone else is doing all the things that you were doing, that was you choosing to live a life authentic to you. And it's also really interesting because, you know, when you're sharing how when you first initially moved to Asia, you're trying to fit in, right? And that a lot of that sense of control led to that journey in that middle part. And when you went to a new environment again, that was kind of like your moment to choose, hey, I'm actually going to do something different, tapping into the resources that you had during that time to really help you get there. I think that's a really hard thing to do, especially in your college years. And so, yeah, I found that super inspirational.
Oh, thank you. I feel like a lot of the things I do now are very contrarian, like being vegan and like not drinking and stuff. But I think that because I started with all of that so young, like the drugs and alcohol, I don't think I really knew myself until I didn't have that anymore. So I feel like college was really a time for me to get to know myself better. And like you said, just find out what it means to me to live authentically. And I do feel like, you know, I haven't gone back, knock on wood. So I think that
I think you're good.
Speaking of that, were there any challenges with, like, I'm sure there was fear in falling back. As you were progressing on your journey, were there some challenges or like resistance that you might have faced during that time?
The biggest thing for me was definitely friendships in college, because a lot of people, and rightly so, were really interested in trying everything for the first time. And for me, it was very difficult realizing that if I no longer wanted to partake in those activities, like I might lose a lot of friends. And I did, but I think that it was more important for me to learn that it's more about the quality of friends than the quantity. And I think that growing up and moving around so much really prepared me for that too, because, you know, I was very open to just being like, that's fine that we're not friends anymore. Let's move on and find people who are more aligned with where I want to be right now. Because I really do think it's difficult to live an authentic life if you have your friends pulling you in different directions that are not authentic to like your journey and who you are. But it was definitely very challenging. And I think too, going home and seeing like family again and trying to kind of reconnect with them made it really difficult, because I think to this day, I'm not sure that they like 100% understand the vegan thing, but it showed me that like there were a lot of things I think growing up that I didn't realize had an impact on like my relationship with food, you know, maybe even substance use and how normalized it is in a lot of cultures. So that was definitely something I had to make terms with. Like I wanted to feel like I could be okay no matter what the environment I was in. And, you know, eventually I was able to even go back to clubs and not feel tempted, which was really huge for me. I think that's when I knew like I'm good.
Something else that you shared, it made me think of a story that Ro shared. When she moved back from New York, she didn't realize how stressful driving was because she was kind of removed from that for a while. I think in the same way, like you didn't realize how bad your body felt until you started feeling good. And once that happens, I think for anyone who is trying to live a more healed and healthy life, once you feel it, that feeling is so great because you can hold on to that. And I think that becomes motivation for you to continue going down that path. You just have to take that baby step to start. And once you feel it, you know, you can always fall back on that feeling.
That's so true. That's really, really true. I think that when I first went vegan, that was the first change I noticed, was how good I felt and how different even my digestion was working. And that feeling alone was enough for me to be like, I now want to try, instead of dairy free, like fully vegan, and let's see how it goes. You don't know how good you can feel until you start feeling good. So for some people like me, I think it takes reaching a certain point of being unwell to actually seek wellness out. So I was not interested in at all in health when I was younger, until I became like, you know, so bad to the point where I needed to. So whatever way you get there, I feel like once you feel it, there's no going back.
And I think especially when the extremes are so extreme and like on the opposite of like you felt so terrible because that's all you knew, it's just what you did, versus now living so much lighter, so much healthier, feeling great every day, waking up. That's amazing, because it's something that I can relate to a lot too. Sometimes friends would be like, do you miss drinking? Do you miss going out? Do you miss that like nightlife? And I'm like, not really. I think I'm happy where I am, and I experienced what I did when we're both younger, and it taught us many lessons, but now that we're here, it's like I'd rather be happy and actually feel, like allow myself to feel and allow myself to feel out of control sometimes, than kind of go back to the numbing, the escaping, and the have control over everything, but at the same time, you know, everything's like kind of slipping between your fingers. So I guess with this new transition into veganism, can you talk a bit more about like how that happened? Because you did talk about trying different diets. In your book, you wrote about eating cucumbers for most of like middle school,
which is so funny because cucumbers are trending right now.
I know.
I made it myself.
A little
it's
triggering.
So good. You could face your past and make a cucumber dish.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I think that the journey was long and definitely not linear. Like it took a long time for me to realize that it wasn't about a diet anymore. It was about really feeding myself in a more like holistic way. So with veganism, I started out eating just dairy free. And then after about a week of feeling really, really good, because my entire family has issues with dairy, I cut out meat as well. And that's when I really started to feel great. But I think what helped me was stumbling upon like the vegan blogs. And I know people joke about like how you go to a recipe blog and they're writing the story about like, oh, you know, it was last August on my mom's farm. But through those stories, I learned a lot more about what veganism was. And once I made the connection in terms of like the ethics and like the other reasons for being vegan, I think that's what kind of kept me vegan. I don't know if I would have continued to eat that way had I not like made that connection in my mind. But it was almost like it gave me a purpose to eat food. Whereas before I was so afraid of it and I would do anything to kind of avoid that. All of a sudden I was so interested in wanting to learn about why certain foods were only available during, you know, the fall at the farmer's market. And all of a sudden it was like this interest in food that I never really had. And I think at the same time, because now all of a sudden I was interested in food, I was way more open to helping like my family prepare dinners. And I kind of felt like I had more of a connection with my grandparents for the first time because we could bond over cooking together and she would teach me food, you know, and I'd actually be interested in listening and try it. Whereas before I'd be like, oh God, I want to avoid any situation around food as much as possible. So it was very healing for me in like more than just a physical sense, but it takes time. It takes time.
It's so cool that like your relationship with food was so hard and now you've completely transformed your relationship with food to something that you do for a living. Can you bring us back to when Veggiekins was born and how that came about? Because this relationship with food didn't have to become this lifestyle that you shared online with people, but it did.
Yeah, I would have never expected that I'd be working in food or with food or write a cookbook. I think that kind of blows my mind. Originally, when I started, it was just Instagram and it was an account that I used with the nutritionist that I was working with during college. So it was actually more of like a food log and it wasn't meant to be public. But through that, I made friends at the time even who were online, also vegan and also in like eating disorder recovery. And it was just so niche and specific that I was like, I don't want to ruin these connections that I have. Like the only people that really get me. Eventually, a bunch of friends found my account and I was kind of like, do I delete my account or do I just kind of, you know, tailor it a little bit more, make the photos look a little better? And that's basically what I did. And I think that too gave me a sense of purpose in putting together a plate of food every day because I felt like, you know, my 10 followers were really, you know, looking forward to like my plate of the day and the posts that I would do. And around that same time, I think veganism was just starting to get a little bit more normal maybe in people's minds. And so I would actually get, you know, questions about what the recipe was for something that I made. So it was almost like a passion project, but it definitely kept me on track in terms of eating disorder recovery. And then basically after about maybe like a year and a half, it became something that was feasible to do full time. So that was really, really fun. And now here we are. And it's crazy to say that I do that full time, but the origin of the food blog was actually a very broken relationship with food to begin with.
But I feel like that's the beauty of your whole story so far is you choose to do these things for yourself, right? Ever since you're young, you chose to like have more control over food for whatever reason, right? And then as you grew older, you chose to try all these different things, try all these different diets, and eventually you found purpose through this new lifestyle. And then you chose to seek out help. I like kind of was in your shoe, right? Your shoes. I always say shoe. I kind of was in your shoe, your singular shoe. But like I would never, I don't know, I think like seeking help to me felt like admitting defeat to the world. Like it's like I wanted to solve this and like do this on my own. So I think for you to also be able to choose to seek help, professional help, and to create this blog and to keep going and to turn it into now like your livelihood, but also I think this like beautiful source of creativity and fun and joy. The whole thing is very, it's kind of what is that word, like serendipitous in a way, where it's like you obviously didn't intend for any of this to happen. Like no, like we never grow up to be like, I'm gonna have an eating disorder and I'm gonna go party and escape and like go through all of these things, right? So for it to still be the beginning or like the beginning middle of your story, and for it to be this eventful in a way, or like positively eventful already, it's like it's wonderful.
I think about it all the time, and I don't think I would have changed the way that anything happened, because I'm so grateful that I had an eating disorder. And, you know, I'm really grateful that I struggled with addiction, because I don't think that I would have ended up where I am now. And I would not have the appreciation for life that I do now had I not had I not gone through that. Oh my goodness. But it's kind of like going back to that idea of realizing how good you can feel. I would have never known that had I not fallen down so hard. I think it's really just a story of like becoming interested in wellness, because I was coming from a place of being so unwell. Yeah, I think, you know, it was a long journey here. Maybe the path could have been a little straighter, but I'm so grateful because I think it also informs my perspective on food and everything that I share too. I feel a little bit more intentional with the things that I'm sharing, that it's for somebody who's out there and maybe still looking for a way to get to the final destination of like feeling really good.
Yeah, because I think even if some of our listeners cannot relate to the type of like eating disorder or addiction, because I think, I don't know, like in this, we've definitely been a lot more open talking about mental health, talking about all of these things, but I feel like sooner or later we'll all go through like addiction, right? Whether it's like social media, whether it is relationship, whether it is, there's so many different ways that these things can come up. So I think for you to have gone through what you've gone through, and now to make it your purpose to help other people in big or small ways, or even just to like bring more joy and light into the world with your beautiful, amazingly photographed meals and food. Like it's yeah, I mean, I keep saying it's beautiful and wonderful, but it really is. You're a light in this world.
I think it gives me a lot of purpose, because the work that we do, there's not always a return on it immediately. Social media is fun, and I think it's relatively easy compared to some jobs out there, but at the same time, if you're lacking that purpose for posting and creating content, I think it's difficult when you don't necessarily get paid every time you post, right? So for me, I think it's something that I really genuinely enjoy doing, despite maybe there not always being immediate payoff. And it's maybe part of the reason why I feel like I've been able to do this so long. It's been so long.
How long?
Like almost a decade.
Very long.
Very old on social media, but yeah, I think
you're
that
still going strong.
Yeah, very strong.
It makes it easier, I think, to do things when you have a purpose behind it. So I'm grateful for that, because I think it gives you a little bit more grit, maybe resilience too. Like I find that now there are not many things that are going to feel more challenging than overcoming the things I did when I was younger. So yeah, toughen me up a little bit more.
So speaking about your career as a peer, I guess, within like the content creation space, I look at the work that you've produced, like obviously on a day-to-day basis, but also, you know, you've come out with ebooks, you've had multiple different merch launches, you now have a cookbook, you have your own matcha brand. It's so amazing that you just think of things and you do it. Right. I think most of us, including myself, you know, we've talked about so many things in the past, like years that we've known each other, like, oh, I want to do this. But then ultimately I'm just like, it just kind of goes off to the wayside. But I feel like for you, when you think of something, it just seems like you are not afraid of failing, or you're just able to push through and make something happen and just to see what happens. What is your mindset or like thinking around trying and just being being yourself?
I think that I feel very sure about a lot of the things that I do because they're usually things that I wish existed for a specific reason. So for the cookbook, it's a very specific type of cookbook that includes recipes that I guess represent the way that I like to cook, which feels very informed by like being Asian, but also being American and like traveling a lot. With the matcha, it's kind of something that I created because I couldn't find what I needed and hope that existed out there. So I feel like a lot of it comes from things that I wish existed. And then I find myself complaining about it. And I'm like, well, I should just do it. Like, let me start looking into it. It can't be that hard. Sometimes it is very hard, but I feel very motivated to just like keep doing things and keep myself busy because I think that going through all those things that I did, I never realized how close I was to life being over. And it sounds so dramatic, but I think about it even now. I'm almost 30. I'm like a good third of the way through my life, you know? So I feel like my relationship with time and how quickly things moves is a little strange sometimes, but I just like to put things out there and I'm very like goal oriented. So I'm like, in a year, these are the things that I want to try and just put out there. I'll launch these 3 things, see how it goes. And then from there, we'll reassess. And I feel like it's similar to the way that you think about life and work and how you're so organized. Maybe I don't think about it as much as I should. Like I'm not nearly as organized as you are, but
I think about it too much, so nothing happens.
Exactly. I feel like it's like a combination of organization, but then also just leading with feeling. Like I kind of just go with how I feel, which is not always the best approach, but it does make things happen. And then you find out if it wasn't a good idea. But yeah, I just feel like, you know, the career that we have is so fleeting and it's not necessarily guaranteed. So I'm like, let's just try and like, let's see what works. I think that's also an important part of like making this career sustainable is like keeping it interesting for you. So you're not doing the same thing every single day. I think it comes from like trying to provide value for people too. So if you can create a product or do something that makes or adds value to someone's life, I think it's worth doing.
And we're talking about this in like a content creation sense, but I think this applies to life in general too, right? How can we bring more joy into our day-to-day life to be a little bolder, to live a little bit more authentically to ourselves?
Yeah, and I think just what you shared about making sure that it's meaningful for you, as long as it's fulfilling for you, you have that drive and energy to keep pushing forward. For our listeners who might be afraid of trying new things or incorporating change into their lives, especially big changes, can you share some advice on where and how they can start?
I would always approach any lifestyle change with small steps and things that seem sustainable because I think change for a lot of people is very scary. It was for me. I think that's why a lot of my issues began actually, but always finding baby steps that you can commit to first and then seeing them almost like goalposts, and the more you progress along, the bigger the change you can make. But I think you have to make sure it's sustainable because you don't want to end up overwhelming yourself with a huge amount of changes and then falling right back to where you started. So that would be my biggest advice for lifestyle change. And for starting something new, I would say the same thing. If you have the luxury of a 9-to-5 job or a comfortable situation that you're already in, start small. It doesn't have to be, you know, a huge buy-in to start anything. Like you could really create a product and sell it same day. But I think just starting is so important because you also want to understand whether or not it's something you actually enjoy. I think a lot of people want to start doing content, but don't realize that it's actually quite a grind. It's not always very creative. Sometimes it's like repetitive and leaning into what people are liking. And then you just have to like kind of ride the hamster wheel. So I think starting and trying is the most important thing. The best way to find out what you like, but also what you don't like is just dipping your toes in.
So what you're just saying of it's good to try and then find out, right? So I tried to look into matcha and create a matcha brand. And I wanted it to be like Taiwanese girl goes back to Taiwan and sees if it's possible to make matcha from the mountainsides of Taiwan, which is not possible. I think it's possible, but then the green tea just is nowhere near as vibrant as Japan. And they don't have like the infrastructure to kind of like to pick the leaves, to shade the leaves, to grind, like to stone grind the leaves and everything, right? So I tried and I realized, you know, I actually don't think I would be happy waking up every day being like a matcha founder, like if that's all I am, because you know I'm surrounded by people like James, my significant other, and you know friends in New York who have their own skincare companies. It's so mission driven, so mission oriented that I was like, I don't like seeing them live and breathe their job. I was like, yeah, I don't think maybe that's not for me. But me saying all of that, is me wanting to ask you. So you've launched a matcha brand, and then it's something that we've also talked about for years.
Oh,
that
gosh,
we've
for
known
years,
each other.
yeah.
So you like had this idea, you tried it out, it didn't really go anywhere the first time around, and then there's a second time and third around, and now Frauth has officially been born into the world.
Yeah.
It tastes delicious. It is beautiful. Everything with like the branding, the packaging. We're almost done drinking it now. For those who are just listening, we made strawberry matcha before. Viv and I both have so many questions around why matcha, and like I guess just what was the process like. There's just so much that happens behind the scenes that most people don't know about. That happens running a business.
I think that to your point about running a business, it's interesting because I do love matcha so much, but there are so many elements that come with being a business owner that are so foreign to me, and honestly include things that I don't enjoy. But to Viv's point, I think that that's only possible for me to push through because I feel so driven and passionate about the whole thing. Basically, the origin of it was my grandma. So my grandma is Japanese. I'm actually only a quarter Japanese, but my family is very much more Japanese culturally, I would say. Like my grandpa is Taiwanese, but he speaks Japanese as well. And we always grew up with matcha on the table or green tea, like at the dinner table or after dinner even. And as I got older, and I want to say I was like in college at the time, matcha started to become more popular, especially in New York. It was everywhere. And I was just so confused why the matcha that I had never really tasted like what I grew up drinking. It was trendy and it was more focused around, I would say, weight loss and detox, and almost treated like a supplement more than like a traditional drink.
This is even pre like aesthetics, because I think now it's like half aesthetics and half caffeine.
Definitely.
But before it was weight loss. Interesting.
Weight loss, metabolism. People were really focused on it for that reason. And those things, like there's some truth to it, but I think that they're missing out on the entire cultural element. And then what I noticed too is that almost all the founders of these matcha brands in the US are owned by people who are not of the culture. There was one brand specifically that I don't know why I thought that the owners were Japanese women. Turns out they're not. And then I realized, wow, there really aren't that many brands out there. And I wonder why that is. I do think part of it is cultural. Like in Japanese culture, it's just a lot more reserved. You know, they don't really go so hard on like the marketing as we do in the US.
Or like global domination or expansion.
Yeah. So I feel like I realized at that point, if I wanted to see it exist, like, why don't I just try? And I will say since then, there are so many more brands that have popped up, which I do think is a great thing, because in my mind, the more high quality matcha there is, the more awareness there is around it. And that's definitely happening. I feel like a lot of people are waking up to really good matcha and understanding what that can be. And it only helps all the businesses that are essentially doing it right. But yeah, I really don't know very many brands that are owned by Japanese women. And I was like, you know, this is something that I would love to see. Like, why not do it? I love it. I love everything about it. I think if you love something enough and you have the drive and almost like that obsession, you will go down the rabbit hole and be able to find things. I tried a couple times and could never find a farm or sources for things I needed, like warehouse, packaging. But then the more and more I like thought about it, and every time the idea would come back in my head, I was like, okay, this is the time we're gonna make it happen. And it's just like one of those things where you go down a rabbit hole and like hours and hours of research, travel, visits, all these things. I feel like if you want it bad enough, you'll find a way to make it happen. So that was definitely my mentality with the matcha. And it's taken so long. There have been so many moments where I like picked it up and put it back down. But sometimes the timing just has to be right. Now we finally have Frauth. So it's really exciting.
I think something that's really unique about your journey and everything that you create, like obviously you're a content creator and there's a lot of creativity involved, but I think especially for you, the type of content that you create, even with recipes, right? You come up with all of these different ways to make a dish with matcha and your obsession with matcha. You know, it's not just making a good old cup of matcha, it's finding so many ways to incorporate the ingredient into it. I've met people before who have felt like they're not creative people, which I know is not true. I think everyone is creative, but for our listeners who might feel like they're not creative people or they want to incorporate more creativity into their life, can you share how you tap into that creative wave when these waves come to you? Because I know it's not always, but honestly, the stuff that you put out, it feels like your wave is just constantly riding. Yeah.
I will say that I feel like I tend to have too many ideas and then not enough time to execute them all. But I think it comes with practice, like sitting down and saying, I'm going to take 10 minutes to write out a list of like 50 ideas that I have. I think getting into that practice regularly is kind of helpful. I used to do it more for just regular recipes every quarter where I'd kind of plan out, okay, these are the recipes that make sense for this season. But I think you could apply the same to even just content. Like if you are even like a fitness content creator or, you know, like a lifestyle content creator, like coming up with these buckets and then forcing yourself to sit down and think about it for 5-10 minutes and just seeing like how much you can get out on paper is really helpful. I think it starts to come naturally after that, where you can be out and you'll have an idea. Like my first instinct is always like write it down immediately. I have so many random notes on my phone, but then also thinking about seasonality and how you can apply just everyday things to whatever like your content niche is. So for me, obviously matcha is a big one. I saw a trend today that I thought was really funny and I was like, Ro, we're gonna film this today, but we're gonna make it matcha. So I think that in a way, really being niche can help you a lot because it makes it so easy to dial into like the type of content you're gonna create. But at the same time, there's something really great about also making yourself the niche so you can really post whatever you want. I definitely think that being niche, like the first option, is a little bit better for more growth on social media. But if you've been in the game for a long time, going back to that sustainability thing, I think you've got to make it something that you can stand to post every day. And so the flexibility is really helpful. But yeah, I feel like creativity is definitely something you can teach yourself to do more.
Yeah, it's like creating structure for those ideas to come up, right?
Yeah.
So when they do come up, writing it down, finding ways to capture that.
Carving out time to actually do it. I mean, I look at you, whenever I hang out with Remy, you just have like 1,000 ideas of like, girl, you can do this, you can do this. I'm like, wait, no, these are actually, because you know sometimes people give you ideas.
Yeah.
You're just like, okay, like,
Yeah.
you know, like, you obviously don't know me enough, and then like, they're just not, like, they're objectively not the best ideas for like your, you know, whatever content you create, right? But when we hang out, your ideas, I'm like, oh my god, yeah, like these are amazing ideas. And then you're just like, hey, let's do this reel, let's do that reel. I'm like, oh yeah, like, yes, I would love to do this reel with you. My question is, and I mean, I kind of know the answer because we're all human, but do you ever run out of ideas? And like, do you ever face burnout? And if so, how do you kind of go about, I guess, like dopamine detoxing and coming back to yourself? Because I think going back to your story of you chose you for so long, and you know, when you moved to college, it was your first time choosing you and like wanting to be authentic to yourself. How do you apply that to the work that you do when, I mean, in this, like, you know, we're talking about it in like a content perspective, but then it's like the same with life, right?
Yeah.
In life, there's so many people pulling you in all these different directions. How do you like come back to yourself?
I think that I always try to remind myself that addiction is a kind of a lifelong disease, and I bring that up because I feel like sometimes me constantly working, it's almost like a form of addiction where it's
I can relate.
like just trying to do something to feel good, right?
Yeah.
So I feel good when I'm being productive, I feel good when I'm achieving, when I'm creating, like all these things. And I think that sometimes you have to kind of force yourself to take a break before you reach the burnout period. I am not the best about doing that, in full transparency, but eventually it ends up happening one way or another. Like I get sick, I get a concussion, and then I'm forced to all of a sudden like take a break. So it kind of goes back to like having a healthy relationship with everything that you do, because at this current moment, I can't really have as much matcha as I was having before. I haven't been able to really work out. There's so many things that I love to do that have become really difficult, and I realized how much that impacted like how I was feeling and my mood. And then I realized, okay, I need to also find joy in other places and other ways, because that means if I ever stop working, or God forbid I get sick, it's over for me, you know? So I think it's like maybe just being really mindful about everything that you do and making sure that you'll be okay if you need to separate or part ways with it for a little bit. But it's definitely easier to come back from break than it is to come back from burnout. And I say that because after the cookbook, I was like disgusted by food almost, and I had no choice but to just keep like pushing through.
Yeah.
So yeah, when I'm lacking creativity or just lacking the motivation, I feel like sometimes the best thing you can do is take half a day off, 1 day off, and you'd be surprised at how many ideas you have coming back, or how excited you are all of a sudden to do it because you weren't able to. That would be my advice, but I am also still learning, so.
Yeah, I think it's like finding that balance is so hard sometimes, and we think that rest means that we're not doing anything, when in reality rest can do so much for our bodies and for our minds and for those ideas to come to you as well. That's like a really good reminder, especially knowing yourself that, you know, if you are prone to reaching a certain level, how do you stop yourself from getting there and insert half day off, insert, you know, a little bit of break, get a massage or something like that to take care of yourself.
Yeah, I think that my favorite tip actually is to trick yourself almost and schedule in things in the Google Calendar, right? So like put a massage on the Google Calendar or put a half day activity that gets you out of the house, because in a way you're being out and about and like maybe you take inspiration from the things that you do that day. So it feels like you're doing something even when the doing is active rest. So that's kind of like one way I've been able to work around feeling bad about doing nothing or taking rest. And it's helped me a lot with work-life balance, I think, because that is definitely a huge struggle when your life is kind of content and content is kind of life. Like that separation is really blurry sometimes.
It's very, very blurry. Okay, we talked a little bit about your cookbook. We'd love to dive a little deeper into, I guess, the inspiration behind it. We've already touched upon it a bit, but in your acknowledgments, you wrote about how your first agent said, this may not be the best book, why don't you make it like a how to hide veggies, or, you know, pivot to a completely different direction. But you fought to have this copy be put out into the world, and it's honestly, it's beautiful. Like the writing, Div and I were just talking about this before you came, and I think the way you write, it's very descriptive, and so it's very nostalgic, because it's things that we all grew up eating, whether it's like the Asian snacks or the pancakes, or, you know, for me especially, like, because I also lived in Taiwan, just reading your descriptions of like your first impressions of Taiwan as a 7-year-old coming into this foreign country. Anyway, very, very well written and an amazing storyteller. So yeah, I guess like your inspiration behind creating this book and also what it means to you.
I think, like you said, it is kind of a love letter to like family and myself, because when I first started the book, it was just going to be recipes, standard cookbook, and there's some room to kind of include a little short story or blurb about each recipe, but in the book there's actually so many stories. It's a lot of writing, so I feel like it's interesting because you could read it as a book or you could read it just as a cookbook and kind of like scratch the stories. But I think it's because the way that I think about veganism and food in general, it's always about so much more than just food for me. It feels like my journey with veganism and learning to really love food were so tied to my family and my relationship with them, and also my relationship with myself and addiction and sobriety. So I think it felt natural to me to almost tell these stories, because a lot of people don't realize how tied we are to food when we think about memories, when we tell stories. When I was younger, my mom told me that if ever I'm reading a book and there's a meal or like, you know, a dinner taking place, to really take note, because those are details that are not necessary. They're there for a reason, and significant events always happen around those things. And I was always like, yeah, okay, like whatever you say, Mom. But the more I realized, like, you get older and so many of our memories are tied to food. Like, you can take one bite of something and instantly feel like you're back in Taiwan, or remember a moment where your grandma made it for you. Like, it's just a really powerful thing, I think, that evokes a lot of emotion for a lot of us. So I think that was kind of like the same feeling that I wanted to aim for the book as well. Like, I wanted it to feel like you could really feel like you were in the moment by creating one of the dishes, and understand like the story behind it and why I created it that way. So for me, throughout the process, it was really cool, because I was talking to my family so much. I was asking them like, do you remember the name of this store in Taiwan that we go to? Or like, do you feel like this recipe is right? I really brought out so many stories within my family that I completely forgot about until writing the book. So the book process itself, I felt like, really brought me closer to my family. And it's fun too, because my family members, some of them do not understand what I do, but this they can understand. It's a tangible book. I'm an author. It's a real job now for them.
They're like, oh yes, after almost a decade.
Exactly.
Congratulations.
Exactly. So I think that there are a lot of Asian cookbooks. To the point about the first literary agent I had, she basically told me that there are so many Asian cookbooks out there, and also so many Asian vegan ones. Like, she referenced my friend Joanne's book, The Korean Vegan, and she's not wrong, but I feel like there's a lack of representation for people who maybe have this mixed experience of being like Asian American and like not Asian enough or not American enough, or just having like a very mixed background family, which I do. So the food feels representative of that too. It's Asian, but it's not too Asian, and it's got elements of like, you know, things that I grew up eating in New York. So
Like healthy goldfish. Exactly. I saw the photos and I was like, oh, it's so cute and it's smiling at me. It makes me so happy.
No, exactly.
Yeah, I think what I love about everything you shared and kind of just today overall is you found a way to like live authentically to yourself, finding a lifestyle that works for you, and then even something through that decision that you struggled with, which was your relationship with your family and how important food was, or how centered food was in that connection. You found a way to marry those two things and create something that brought everything together while still staying authentic to you. And that's the same with Veggiekins, with matcha. It's just finding ways to live authentically to you, identifying a problem and wanting to solve it, and doing it in a very creative way all the while.
We shared a story of how you would be eating with your grandpa and you'd be like, what is this vegan? Why aren't you eating the fancy crabs and the lobsters that I would bring back from Chinatown in Queens? And how over time now, like you're able to be like, hey grandpa, and then now he obviously may not fully understand, but then he's bringing you more veggies and like high quality produce, and you can joke with him to be like, hey, at least you're saving more money and it's like a better bang for your bucks. Little stories like that, it's so meaningful, because I think it just reminds us, even though, you know, all our upbringings may be different, but this connection with your family and food, and I think Asian culture's food and family, it's like so intertwined. It really is, like, it's so meaningful.
Yeah, I think that early on in my vegan days, I was very quick to dismiss my grandparents and just be like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. Like, I don't even care about this food anyway. But then as I got older, I realized that these are the recipes that I need to pass down if I want them to continue to exist. Like, it's the only way that we keep the culture alive is to share it and teach it to, you know, our family members. And so I think I was set on finding a way to be myself and do it vegan, but also still pay respect to like the culture. And there's definitely a way to do it. I think that people don't realize sometimes that like healthy lifestyle changes, or, you know, even if you're gluten-free or doing any other kind of diet, there's ways to still incorporate your culture. It doesn't automatically mean that you're limited to eating like very Western diet foods. And most importantly, like I think you really have to stay connected to your culture. Like it's just the most important thing.
It's not so black and white, and I think that's similar to everything you shared as well, just finding balance and ways to incorporate these complex nuances, detailed parts of us, layered parts of us all together so that we can live harmoniously with ourselves. Yeah. So with this new season in your life, bringing it to now after launching Frauth, what are you looking most forward to in the upcoming year?
I think what's been really exciting is having new ways to partner with and like support other brands. So through Frauth, what's been really cool is that as a business owner, I can now collaborate with brands, but in a more meaningful way where we're actually both supporting each other. So we have a lot of launches coming up where we're making like a collaborative product, which has been cool. And I've really tried to focus on working with other women-owned business and Asian-owned businesses. And I think those are opportunities that like maybe I had as an influencer as well that could kind of support the brand, but this is just far more meaningful where we can actually move products for them as well. And that's been really exciting for me. It's just like a new avenue of exploring what it means to do business, I guess. And then I also feel really great about having more tangible products and maybe more independence when it comes to like my social media platforms, because a lot of my income as a creator relies heavily on brand partnerships, whereas now I am the brand that I'm promoting, and it doesn't even feel like an ad necessarily because I'm just like sharing what I'm doing, what I love. So that's been a really huge shift for me finally, and it feels really, really good. But yeah, I think it's more of that and less trying to grab onto like all the trends the second I see them. Like I'll still do them here and there when I think they're funny, but you know, I should have made cucumber whatever like 2 weeks ago, you know, but now I feel a little bit more settled in like having a purpose and a direction for the things that I'm doing.
Beautiful. Just like your heart and soul. Thank you so much for coming on to Voice Hub.
Thanks for having me.
Where can our listeners find you?
You can find me at Veggiekins on all platforms. You can find the cookbook anywhere you buy books. It's called Sesame Soy Spice. And then the matcha, we're sold out right now, but we will be restocking mid-September And you can find that at frauthmatcha.com.
Wait, I totally forgot to say this, but, and I told you, all the things that I know about matcha, I learned it from her. So.
From the matcha mommy.
The literal